Pay close attention to how people act around you, not to what they say, but to what they permit themselves to do. They interrupt you. They disguise disrespect as humor. They make decisions without involving you. None of this happens by chance. It happens when the world quietly decides something about you, that you won't push back, that you won't enforce boundaries, that crossing your line carries no cost. So they cross it again and again. You tell yourself it's normal, that you're calm, that you're above it. But calm without consequence isn't strength, it's permission. And once people feel permitted around you, they stop treating you like a factor. This video exists to expose that rule, to show how harmless behavior is read socially, why explanation never fixes it, and why the men who reverse it don't become loud or aggressive. They become unavoidable. Here's the part most men never examine. Harmlessness doesn't survive because the world imposes it on you. It survives because your mind rewards it. Every time you hold back, something inside you relaxes. Every time you don't escalate, your nervous system settles. Every time you explain instead of enforcing, tension drops. That relief isn't moral. It's biological. Your brain is built to reduce threat, not command respect. So early on, it learned a simple equation. When I soften, nothing gets worse. And anything that prevents things from getting worse gets reinforced. Over time, this stops being a choice. You don't decide to hesitate. Hesitation fires before thought. You don't consciously choose to explain yourself. Your mouth does it automatically. You don't deliberately lower your presence. Your body does it the moment tension enters the room. That's why harmlessness feels natural, not because you're weak, but because your system links compliance with safety. And safety feels good. This is where confusion sets in. Many men mistake emotional regulation for authority. They believe staying calm means staying in control. But calm that produces no external consequence isn't control. It's containment. Your nervous system feels steady while your position erodes. And because you feel composed, you assume you're doing something right. Meanwhile, the world responds to a different signal. Not your intentions, not your intelligence, not your restraint, your response pattern. If your body consistently avoids friction, your presence communicates one thing. Nothing happens if you push here. That message travels faster than words ever could. This is why understanding power doesn't solve the problem. You can read every book, analyze every interaction, explain exactly why people behave the way they do and still be harmless. Because the issue isn't knowledge, it's reflex. Your system learned to smooth situations before they escalated, to anticipate reactions, to adjust yourself first. That made you adaptable. It didn't make you respected. And once installed, it runs on autopilot. You don't notice how quickly you soften your tone, how fast you clarify, how instinctively you reduce discomfort. You just feel normal. But normal is what keeps the pattern alive. Hierarchy doesn't respond to how calm you feel inside. It responds to how much resistance you project outward. And resistance is exactly what your nervous system was trained to avoid. This is why change feels wrong at first. Not socially, but internally. When you don't explain, your body tightens. When you don't soften, your pulse spikes. When you hold your ground instead of diffusing, something inside you panics. That panic isn't intuition. It's conditioning reacting to the loss of safety. The version of you that survived by being harmless depends on predictability, and predictability is the opposite of consequence. This is the trap. You keep choosing what feels regulated over what produces effect. You prioritize internal comfort over external position, and because it feels intelligent, you don't question it until you notice something unsettling. Your mind has been optimizing for peace, not power, and peace without leverage is just quiet surrender. What matters now isn't changing behavior, it's understanding where this reflex came from. Because once you see how it was installed, why it was rewarded, and why resisting it feels unnatural, you'll realize the real conflict was never with the world. It was always with the version of you that learned how to stay safe. This reflex didn't appear in a single dramatic moment. It was reinforced through hundreds of small corrections that taught you what worked. Early on, you learned that agreeableness kept things calm. Not pushing back dissolved tension. Adjusting yourself prevented escalation. At that stage of life, stability mattered more than leverage. So your system adapted, efficiently, unconsciously. You learned to read rooms before they turned hostile, to sense disapproval before it was spoken, to soften before anyone hardened toward you. Those skills kept things manageable, and because they worked, they were rewarded. Praise followed compliance. Relief followed restraint. Approval followed silence. Your nervous system recorded the pattern. This keeps me safe, and anything that keeps you safe gets repeated. Over time, strategy became identity. You didn't just behave cautiously. You became the one who anticipated, adjusted early, prevented friction before it appeared. That anticipation felt smart, controlled, but it came at a cost. It trained you to move second, to read before acting, to wait for signals, and while that made you adaptable, it also made you readable. The more predictable you became, the less resistance you projected, and resistance is what slows others down. Here's what most men never realize. The same behavior that protects you early in life limits you later. The environment changes, the reflex doesn't. The world no longer rewards quiet compliance. It rewards clarity, friction, and consequence. But your system is still operating under an old survival contract. So when tension rises, your body reaches for the familiar solution. De-escalate, explain, smooth it over. Not because it's wise, because it's familiar. That's why harmlessness feels justified. You tell yourself you're being mature. That conflict isn't worth it. In isolation, those thoughts make sense. But systems don't respond to isolated moments. They respond to patterns. And the pattern your behavior creates isn't neutrality. It's accessibility. People learn how far they can go with you by watching how you respond under pressure. If pressure produces explanation, they push again. If it produces silence without consequence, they push further, not out of malice, but because nothing stops them. The uncomfortable truth is this. Your reflex is loyal to your past, not your present position. It was optimized for environments where being easy meant staying safe. But ease isn't power. Ease invites use. Breaking the pattern feels wrong, not ethically, physically. When you don't soften, your system reacts. When you don't explain, your body tightens. When you hold the line, a voice says, "This isn't safe." That voice isn't intuition, it's memory. What once prevented loss now guarantees it. Because the rules changed, you are no longer rewarded for being manageable. You're evaluated on whether you create friction, not chaos, but pause. Knowledge alone won't free you. Reflex doesn't answer to logic. Conditioning dissolves through violation, not reckless violation, but deliberate refusal to respond the old way. That's why the transition feels like betrayal. You're turning against a pattern that once protected you. The shift doesn't start with confrontation. It starts earlier, when your system reaches for the familiar response and you don't give it. Not to assert power, but because you recognize the reflex and refuse to obey it. That decision looks small externally. Internally, it's violent. Your body pushes back. The urge to explain, soften, restore balance surges. That urge isn't random. It's your system trying to return you to a predictable role. This is the first refusal, not of others, but of yourself. Change doesn't begin when you act differently. It begins when you stop supplying what you've always given. Explanation, reassurance, adjustment. The moment you don't offer those automatically, something shifts. Not in the room, but in you. For the first time, you're tolerating friction, and friction feels wrong. Your mind searches for reasons to undo it. This isn't worth it. You're creating tension. Those thoughts aren't insight. They're negotiation. Most men fold here. They mistake discomfort for error. They retreat. The pattern resets. But if you stay still, if you let the discomfort exist, something crucial happens. The reflex loses authority. The discomfort peaks, then fades. Nothing collapses. The danger never arrives. You learn viscerally that you can survive without erasing yourself. From the outside, nothing dramatic happens. You don't raise your voice. You don't posture. You simply stop rushing to restore balance. Internally, hierarchy shifts. The version of you that exists to smooth things over loses control. Now, behavior changes structurally. You pause before speaking, not to calculate, but because you no longer need to fill space. You stop explaining what doesn't require explanation. You allow silence to stand, not as a tactic, but as a refusal to manage discomfort that isn't yours. Something subtle happens around you. People slow down, not because you demanded it, but because the old pattern stopped working. Predictability disappears, and predictability was what made you manageable. This refusal is quiet, invisible, but it compounds. Each time you don't soften, The reflex weakens. Each time you don't explain, the old identity loses ground. Each time you tolerate tension, your system learns a new rule. I don't have to disappear to stay safe. Once your body accepts that, new behavior becomes possible, and the world responds to possibility long before it responds to declarations. You don't announce boundaries. You enforce them through behavior. You don't demand respect. You make disrespect inconvenient. People hesitate. Conversations shift. Interruptions decrease. Decisions pause. Not because you asked, but because the system recalibrated. Some people pull back. That isn't loss. It's sorting. Hierarchies always sort when behavior changes. Some adjust upward. Some drift away. Both outcomes are information. You'll see pressure tests. Comments designed to provoke explanation, questions meant to pull you back. These aren't attacks, they're probes. And when you don't default, they fail. When enough probes fail, they stop coming. This is when your presence gains weight, not because you asserted it, but because friction exists now. You're not louder, you're heavier. Rooms don't feel tense, they feel attentive. When you speak, it matters. When you don't, nothing collapses. That's the signal. This phase is fragile. Relapse and predictability returns instantly. But hold the line consistently and the shift stabilizes. Eventually, it stops requiring effort. Power stops feeling like effort because you stopped feeding the behaviors that made you easy to handle. You don't chase silence. You don't react to disrespect. You don't lean into approval. The old levers stop working. Power doesn't come from asserting yourself. It comes from withholding access to your time, your reactions, your availability. Humans don't respect what they can move easily. They respect what resists without strain. You don't correct narratives. You let time do it. You don't chase validation. You let people feel the cost of losing access. And when rejection happens, you withdraw cleanly. No speeches, no bitterness. Absence forces recalculation. While they process the void, you upgrade. Quietly, privately. Power isn't built through revenge, it's built through replacement. Eventually, the shift completes. You stop trying to be understood, liked, included, not from bitterness, but because those needs no longer control you. You didn't become louder, you became harder to move. And once that happens, you don't need to explain. People feel it. They adjust without being told. That's the line most men never cross, the point where power stops being chased and starts being responded to. If you're still here, you're done playing the old role, done shrinking to be acceptable, done explaining to stay safe. So if you're ready to keep building this version, the one that isn't manageable, predictable, or easily replaced, like the video, not as support, as a signal. Subscribe if you're done being harmless and ready to move with quiet authority.